At the beginning of this evening, we rose and we sang the national anthem of Israel with its theme, Liot Am Chofshi Ba'artzenu, to be a free people in our own land. Liot Am Chofshi Ba'artzenu. I arrived in Israel, from Israel last Friday, and I want to give you a picture of an Am Chofshi, a free people in its own land, over the 10 previous days. 2 weeks ago, today, in Jerusalem, the capital city of a free people living in its own land, at 10 of 11 in the morning, in broad daylight, on the main street of Jerusalem, Rehov Yafo, across the street from the main post office, around the corner from the Russian compound, the main police station, with hundreds of people walking, an Arab murdered 2 Jews in broad daylight in cold blood. Liot Am Chofshi Ba'artzenu, to be a free people in our own land. When the Jews chased the Arab and caught him, the police came in, used tear gas and clubs, beating the Jews, and they saved the Arab. Today he sits in the Russian compound, eating at our expense, drinking at our expense, a national hero to every single Arab. He will receive a life sentence, perhaps something more severe, 2 life sentences, one for each Jew that he murdered. Will sit in Ramleh prison or in Beersheba for 3 years until the next exchange of prisoners, and go free. Just as 4 years ago, 1,150 Arab terrorists, including 150 murderers, went free, 600 of whom were allowed to remain inside the country. Liot Am Chofshi Ba'artzenu, to be a free people in our own land. On that day, Jews were murdered, and on that day, Jews were arrested. I sat in the Russian compound for 48 hours, along with 20 of our people who were tear gassed. I listened to the police, their bitterness, their frustration, their anger, and their fear, because that is the word, fear. Jews today are afraid in their own homeland. I was freed 2 hours before Shabbat, and that Shabbat, I went to the Western Wall, the Kotel. And I went through Shar Shechem, to Damascus Gate, since I thought that it would be appropriate to have at least one Jew go through the Damascus Gate. Nobody goes today through the Damascus Gate. We are afraid. Because we are a free people in our own land. When I arrived there, there was indeed not a single Jew in the entire area. When I reached the Kotel at 6 p.m. on a Shabbat, for Mincha, there were not 30 Jews at the Kotel. The same Kotel where 2 months ago, Jews stood praying, and suddenly from above the Temple Mount, stones and rocks rained down on them, and they ran in panic. The Temple Mount. I remember the Temple Mount 22 years ago when it was liberated. And I remember Motagur, who at that time led the forces that liberated it, shouting, even this leftist, was caught up in the ecstasy as he shouted into his walkie-talkie, Harabayit bi'adenu, Harabayit bi'adenu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. The Temple Mount is in our hands. The Temple Mount is in their hands. We took the key from the Waqf, the Muslim Council, and gave it back to the Mufti within 2 days. And so the Temple Mount is in their hands. And they stone Jews who stand at the wall to be a free people in our own land. That Sunday, a 13-year-old boy from Bat Yam who had been missing for a week was found in Jaffa. He had been raped and mutilated by 2 Arabs. I went to the home the following night, Monday. I was sitting Shiva. And I sat next to his uncle, who said to me, from now on, I don't let my child out of the house. Liot am chofshi ba'artzenu, to be a free people in our own land. The following day, Tuesday, they announced that they had discovered the body of an Israeli soldier missing for 2 months. 20-year-old paratrooper. He was found in a shallow grave 10 kilometers from Ashkelon, inside the Green Line. He had been shot in the head and his body hacked to pieces. I went to the funeral, arriving there by an indirect way because the police announced that there were roadblocks around the area of Ashdod to make sure that I would not reach the funeral. I reached the funeral anyhow. One has to know how to get to Ashdod in various ways. The crowd was angry. The crowd shouted. I said to them, vengeance, take vengeance. I saw for the second time in a week angry Jews. And that's a hope. They went along the highway and they stoned every Arab car that they saw. And they were beaten up by police, but they weren't afraid. That's a good sign. That's a good hope. Because I want to tell you that the state of Israel is disintegrating. And Jews sit and tell me, I want to get out of here. And when a Jew is afraid in his own country, that is the beginning of the end of Zionism, of a Jewish state, and that is the greatest victory of the Intifada. We are not a free people in our land. And more of our land is not ours. Last month, the border police were sent to an Arab village of Nachalim, near Bethlehem, to make arrests. When they arrived, they found hundreds of Arab villagers waiting for them. Somehow they had heard about it, about the fact that the border police would be coming. They attacked them with rocks and with Molotov cocktails, with fire bombs. And so the border police shot and killed 4 Arabs. And it is a tragedy. Only 4 Arabs. Instead of giving them medals for shooting as their lives were being threatened, 2 of the commanders were censured, demoted, and the process of emasculating the border police, the same process which has been going on vis-a-vis the army for 18 months, has begun. The army of Israel has been emasculated. An intifada, 18 months of an intifada, a year and a half. The army of Israel, which 22 years ago, in 1967, defeated Arab armies and nations in 6 days, it cannot defeat a mob of women and children in 18 months? Of course it can. But they tie the soldier's hands. He's given a gun, sent to Gaza or to Kalkilia or Jenin, and there he is told, here's a gun and make sure that you don't use it. The orders of the Central Command under General Mitzna are as follows. A soldier who is attacked by a stone-throwing mob must first shoot in the air and warn them in Arabic, stand back. If he is still alive, he then is allowed to shoot one demonstrator in one leg. If he is still alive, he may then shoot freely. Is it any wonder that what the soldiers do when attacked is to consider, if I do not shoot, I may be killed, and if I do shoot, I may sit in a military prison, and therefore they back away. They back away. Do you know what a 10-year-old Arab thinks as he sees the soldiers backing away from him? Do you know what that is? That's why there is an intifada for 18 months. And that's why there will be one for 36 months. The chief of staff of the Israeli army tells the world, we cannot put an end to the intifada because it has its roots in Arab nationalism. Do you know what that was worth to every Arab? You cannot put an end to the intifada? Then resign and let someone who can put an end to it. We cannot put an end to the intifada. If our Minister of Defense in 2 days, there would be no intifada. The soldiers are bitter, the soldiers are frustrated, the soldiers don't know what they are doing there. They want to be free. Let's take care of them already. But instead, this two-headed non-government, headed by two small, insignificant, shallow people. And the tragedy is that there are Jews who to this day persist in this insane myth which is killing us. Well, Shamir is better than Paris. What is twice nothing? What is 5 times nothing? What is 100 times nothing? Shamir is better than Shimon Peres. Who has been the prime minister for these 18 months of the Intifada? Peres or Shamir? Who has controlled the government for these 18 months? Peres or Shamir? Who did not annex the territories since 1977 when Menachem Begin took over? The Labor or Likud? We worship idols. Don't have the courage to say that there is no difference between them. So we sit and we hear of an insane peace plan for elections. The moment the Arabs are allowed elections, it means that it is their land. It means that it belongs to them. The minute that we did not annex those territories, it meant that the Arabs were right. They are occupied. If they're liberated, then you annex them. If you don't annex them, it means that they're not liberated, that they are occupied, and don't blame the world for thinking that if the Palestinians say it is Palestine, and Shamir says it is the status quo, then morally the Palestinians are right. Don't blame the world. We are to blame. There never, ever has been an Arab problem. There has only been a Jewish problem. In the Bible, there's a law that if one finds the body of a Jew who has been murdered, and we do not know who the murderer is, the elders of the nearest town must come out to the spot of the murder and declare, Yadeinu lo shafchu et adam hazeh. Our hands did not shed this blood. The rabbis ask in the Talmud, did anyone suspect the elders of having shed that blood? The elders? But the meaning the rabbis say is that the declaration is, we did everything possible to guarantee that he would not be killed. We did everything that was in our power to make sure that he would be safe. Can the government of Israel rise today before God and man and say, Yadeinu lo shafchu et adam hazeh, we did not have a share in the shedding of Jewish blood? There are two murderers of each and every Jew in Israel. One is the Arab who did the act, and the other is that Jew, the liberal Jew, the moral Jew, the ethical Jew, who said to throw out the Arabs, that's a terrible thing, that isn't right. And so he allowed the murderer to stay in that country, and he had a share in the shedding of that blood. The rabbis speak of two kinds of mercy. Rachmanut, mercy, and Rachmanut shel tipshim, and the mercy of fools. Of course, the Jew is commanded to be merciful. You are merciful to decent people. You are merciful to good people. It is the mercy of fools that decrees that one has to be merciful to cruel people who, because you are merciful to them, in the end, murder innocent people. There is no commandment to be merciful unto those who would kill us. The rabbis are much more clear in their thinking than peace now. The rabbis command, if one comes to slay you, slay him first. That is moral. That is ethical. Because the blood of innocent people can be spared, can be saved, if we ensure that the murderers will never, ever have the opportunity to shed it. It's now been 20 years since I've been active in Jewish public affairs. It's not easy. It's not easy. I remember in 1974, I was arrested in Israel, put in alone in a cell for 31 days. And I was angry at the Jewish people. I was bitter. And I remember walking around in my cell and saying, I've had it. That's it. If Jews don't want to be saved, I'm not going to save them. Let them save themselves. Who needs it? I sat down on my cot, and I had a Tanakh, a Bible. And I was angry, and I opened it up. And it opened up to a verse in Jeremiah, in chapter 20, in which he bemoans and he castigates the Jews, and he's angry at God. And he says, and I said, I will not make mention of his name anymore. But his word was in my heart as a burning fire, and I could not keep it within. That was the verse that I opened up to. It's not easy to save Jews, because the Jewish people suffers from a terrible disease called exile, galut. 1900 years of exile is in us. 1900 years of an abnormality Everything that God makes in this world, he makes for a purpose, a moral purpose. Every creature. And so he made a creature called a lemming. A lemming. Let me tell you what a lemming is. It's a strange creature that God made for a lesson. A lemming is a rodent-like creature, like a rat. But he's a strange kind of a rodent. For every few years, for no apparent reason, thousands of them suddenly run amok, wildly racing towards a cliff, and they throw themselves over and commit suicide. Now, why in the world would God create a lemming? What lesson does he want to teach us? He wants to teach us that there are two-legged lemmings of the Mosaic persuasion. We are insane. We are destroying a dream. For 2,000 years we had a dream. Our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our great-great-great-grandparents, throughout the exile, throughout the Galut, they had a dream. They sat in the shame of the exile, the humiliation, the fear, the terror. And they had a dream that someday they would leave the fear and leave the terror and leave and they would go home. And they would go back to their own country and have their own state where they would not be afraid and not live in terror and humiliation. They would be tall and they'd be proud and free. And their children would walk the streets without fear. It was a dream called Shivat Zion, the return to Zion. God's mercy. We have that dream, and we have turned it into a nightmare. A nightmare. Jews in Israel stand outside a prison where Arab terrorists are, and they shout their support for them. This is normal. This is normality. Full-page ads in the papers of Israel demanding that Israel free terrorists and put an end to the oppression. Is there one Arab in the entire world who would place a similar ad in an Arab paper against the Arabs? They are normal. And we are deeply disturbed, suffering from 1900 years of galus, of exile. I don't know what is going to be unless we have power. I don't know what is going to happen. At this moment, tens of Israeli soldiers are sitting in prison in Israel for refusing to serve in the occupied lands. Unbelievable. Last month there was a demonstration of hundreds of 12th grade students from North Tel Aviv at the Ministry of Defense, stating that when they finish their 12th grade high school and are drafted, they will not serve in the occupied land. These children from North Tel Aviv who don't realize that to the Arabs, the occupied lands mean North Tel Aviv. You complain about Peter Jennings? Israel TV is 100 times worse than Peter Jennings. Every night they poison us. Every night we see such moving things as a father and mother, Arabs, sitting next to a home which has been demolished, and they sit weeping, the army demolished our home. And for what? Well, true that their son murdered a Jew, after all. And they allow this poor father and the poor mother to cry and to fill more and more Jews with more and more guilt. Peter Jennings. Who's Peter Jennings? Jennings is dandruff. Here's what Peter Jennings is. But Israel TV affects our young people and fills them with guilt and self-hate, and maybe we are occupiers, and maybe we are fascists, and maybe we are... And Israel TV is state-owned. And we're a Shamir. Fire them, throw them out. But of course, Shamir is better than Peres. Last year, they banned the Kach movement from running. And the ostensible reason was racism. Yitzhak Shamir knows that we're not racist. And Yitzhak Shamir couldn't care less about racists anyhow. The reason why we were banned was because at the end, the poll showed us getting between 8 and 11 seats. Most of them from the Likud. That's why the mafia banned us. It pained me to see all the liberal Jews who speak of democracy and the right to free expression to everyone, the silence that struck American liberal Jews. If the High Court had banned an Arab PLO party that is sitting in the Knesset, do you know what the outcry would have been here? Do you know how Woody Allen would have pecked away? And Richard Dreyfuss would have said it is another Dreyfuss trial? Do you know the protests and the demonstrations and the column written by your local anti-Semite, Yehuda Lev? But there were no protests, because liberals are the greatest of all frauds. They are liberal until their own particular ox has been gored. They banned us and took away the right of at least 200,000 Jews to vote for their own party. What they did, they established a precedent that if the Knesset feels that a certain party is not good or not moral or not right or is dangerous, it can be banned. And it opened the doors to anyone who has the power to banning any party that he does not like or that he feels is dangerous to him. That's what they did. And so people come to me, and they came here, and they said, well, that's it, it's all over. What's going to happen now? It's all over. It's all over. I sit and I watch as Peace Now gets millions of dollars, money to demonstrate and to protest and to place ads and to influence people. Why is it that no one who supports Peace Now says, well, Peace Now is not in the Knesset, therefore I won't support them? Why? Why? How come no one says, well, what's Peace Now doing with all the money that it raises? What does Kach do with it? I want to know what they do with it. We buy Cadillacs with it. Let me tell you one thing. They'll never let me into the Knesset, ever, under any name. They're terrified of me. If I was going to get 10 seats in November, now if I ran, I'd get 20 seats hands down. On Israeli television, they show the arrest, and they showed hundreds of people shouting, Kahane Melech Yisrael. They saw that. They saw that. That terrified them more than ever. That's why there's going to be a trial, an indictment and a trial. Of course, because they're terrified. That's why the government of Israel is pushing the government here to make sure that I'm not a citizen so that I will never get a visa to come here. That's why in my forthcoming trial, and by the way, the judge there will be Judge Robinson, the one who sentenced Pollard to life. And since I mentioned Pollard already, let me say that we Jews have an obligation to two great Jews, the Pollards, for having given so much of themselves. And God will forever judge the government of Israel as the Pollards ran to the embassy for having locked the gates on them. Do whatever you possibly can. And don't be afraid, but it's not a safe subject. They are heroes. They are not spies who wanted to hurt America. They were people who wanted to help Israel receive the information that America had promised to give Israel and did not. It was not a disaster that I was banned. You're wrong. God is good. Listen, let Jews think, let Jews have vision and think with great minds and not narrow ones. What would have happened had the Koch party not been banned? Let's assume that we would not have been banned. We would have gotten 10 seats, and then there would have been an all-night chafla, an all-night party. The next morning, instead of waiting 51 days, the next morning, Peres and Shamir would have gotten together to form a government of national unity, and this time for 4 years. So I would be sitting in the Knesset, 10 seats, impotent, frustrated, and not able to do a thing. And let's say that after 4 years, Israel would still be around. Punchy, but around. And we have another election. And this time people say, Gamalnu zel rak kahane, and I get 30 seats. And this time we have a double chafla. The next morning, Peres and Shamir get together, this time at 4 a.m. already, to form a government of national unity to make sure that Kahane sits frustrated with 30 seats, but frustrated and impotent. The Knesset is not the way. We have to save Jews from themselves by doing what we have been doing in Israel now for the last 2.5 months. We have to demand a national emergency referendum in which the people have the right to vote on the following proposition. Kain or lo, yes or no, shall the Knesset be dissolved? New elections held in which every party, anyone can run if they accept as a minimal platform the following 3 points. 1, to crush the intifada by any means necessary. 2, to annex all of the territories. And 3, to throw out the Arabs. A referendum is the right of a people. They have the right to demand it. It transcends everything. And when I say this at rallies, the crowds stand there and they're transfixed and they say, Nachon, Kain, Mish'alam, a referendum. And that's what we do nightly, rallies after rallies. Last Thursday, right before leaving for America, we held a rally in Dizengoff Square. Dizengoff Square, not exactly Koch territory. You think those days are gone. 1,000 people there. Half of them were labor types with Mapai written on their foreheads. Not one heckler. everyone cheered and clapped and cheered, Kahane, Kahane. That's the change that is taking place. A referendum. And if the government will not give it to them, then rallies and demands and sit-downs and protests and riots, because that is the right of the people. And no one can take away that right from them. That is what we are demanding. What do we need money for? To make sure that we have the power. Advertisements and bring down people in buses and trucks. Why can we not have the kinds of rallies, the huge rallies that Peace Now has? We could have it too if we did what they did. They hire 100 buses, 200 buses, and they bring down people. We could do that if we had money. They place full-page ads. We could do that if we had money. They have offices everywhere. We could do that if we had money. And if we had people that, rather than sitting and kvetching, how come Kahane wasn't smart and said, well, I'm not exactly what you think I am. I'm exactly what you think I am. That's why I'm Kahane and not some other fraud. That's why when I was walking alone to the coattail, alone, the border police saw me and, ran over to me and said, "What, you're crazy, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And I heard over the walkie-talkie, make sure Kahane doesn't start trouble. Okay? See the difference? You see the difference? Because I'm Kahane. And the minute that I pretend that I am not Kahane, who needs me? So you're here today. We are not losers. We are winners. We are winners. On the day that I stood in front of the High Court and they gave me an opportunity to lie, and they hoped that I would lie, because then I would win a few seats but would forever lose my credibility. And I didn't lie. And I chose to be temporarily out of the Knesset, but to keep my name and the truthfulness. And above all, let people say, Ze gever ze. This is a man who amiti. He is truthful. When we stuck on that day, we won. We didn't lose. The High Court lost. The Knesset lost. Israel lost. But we won. So we are continuing. And please God, the tragedy is that because of the killings, we will have power. Because it is an incomprehensible people. It only learns from tragedy. Without tragedy, we learn nothing. But if that's the way it is, then that's the way it is. Every tragedy gives us more and more strength and more power. And every tragedy has people, not only Sephardic Jews, and not only such other people that have always been normal, but other people too now are becoming normal. Of course this is so. Of course this is so. You have to make sure that I have power, not the Knesset. I want the Shilton. I want to rule. I want to save Jews from themselves. And you can do it. And you must do it. You have an obligation to do it. I'm not raising money here for a yeshiva or for an institution. If we don't have power, there will be no yeshivas and no institutions and no state, God forbid. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about saving the Jewish people. We are the hope of Israel. And at the rallies, you see people shouting, Rakatem, only you. And they're right. It's only us. That's why they hate us so. The government and the establishment, that's why they hate us so. Because they're afraid of us. They know what the people see in us. Emit truth. Give us the power. I want to be prime minister, not because I want to be prime minister. I want to be prime minister so that I can save the Jewish people, because it's a fire in my bones, and if I want to keep it in, I cannot. That's why you're here, to help me save the Jewish people, and in the end, to help me save us, all of us together. For the struggle for the state of Israel is the struggle for every Jew. If God forbid there would be no state of Israel, don't think that your lives here will be worth a kopeck. Give me that strength and give me that power. And understand that someday Jews will walk freely throughout the land, morning, noon, or night, because it will be a land of the Jewish people, free of people who would bring on us the long Holocaust, not the swift Holocaust of gas chambers, but of the same axes and knives that they use against each other in Lebanon. And no guilt. There is nothing wrong with a Jew living. There is nothing, and there is no mitzvah in a Jew dying. No guilt. Only Jewish power and only Jewish faith. Faith in God and faith in a powerful Jewish army. That is the way to bring the Messiah speedily and happily in our days. Amen. Amen.